Hello everyone. Today I'm going to show how to secure your API gateway endpoint using Cognito Authorizer. There are two ways you can secure your endpoint in AWS. One is using Lambda Authorizer, other one using Cognito Authorizer. This video more focus on Cognito Authorizer. However, if you are interested and after the Lambda Authorizer, you can find the link in the description. All the code I'm going to use in this video will be in the GitHub. So as usual, if you like this video and content, please subscribe my channel. Really appreciate it. Thanks. Let's get in. What we're gonna achieve in this video using a diagram. We have a user. A user is trying to access API gateway endpoint. As you can see, we have a get endpoint called user. Behind the API gateway, there is a Lambda which is doing some work. It could be business logic, any business logic, or it could be any DynamoDB table or any other AWS services. So far, it's working. But the problem here is any user in the internet, they can access this get user endpoint. Right. Now, time to secure our endpoint. How do you do that? There's something called authorizer in AWS API gateway. I will show in a bit what is authorizer in the AWS console with the demo. In theory, there are mainly two authorizers. One Lambda authorizer, other one Cognito authorizer. What is actually authorizer do? With the authorizer, then when the user is trying to access API gateway, the request is validated by the authorizer. If the user has a necessary permission, then the user is able to access these resources. In this case, it could be a DynamoDB table or the Lambda. If the user doesn't have a necessary permission, the request is terminated. The user will get 403 status response code. The Cognito Authorizer is supported by the Cognito user pool. In this video, I'm going to show how do we use Cognito Authorizer to secure our endpoint. As I mentioned, if you're after the Lambda Authorizer, which is the other authorizer, please check link below. You can find the link to the Lambda Authorizer video. In summary, we're going to implement Cognito Authorizer to secure our endpoint step by step. Next, we're going to check what is Cognito. Right, I'm in the AWS console. What I'm going to do, we're going to create a new API endpoint. Click on the API gateway. Currently, I do have a one already exit. What I'm going to do, we're going to create a new one. So it's come with a different API type you can choose. The first one is a HTTP API. As you can see, it's if you want to create a low latency and cost-effective REST API, this is where you can use, and it's more likely all way. And the second one is a WebSocket. If you want to create something like chat application, keep connection between the all the way, so where you can use a WebSocket API. The third one is REST API, the one that I'm going to create. This is a more public. The fourth one is private. If you want to use this REST API within the VPC, that's where you can use the fourth one. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to click a third option. So it's REST and select the new API, or you can use something example, or you can use getting from something API, or you can clone any existing API. So what I'm going to do, I'm gonna create a new one, give it a name as API, and again the endpoint either you can select if you want to get more performance. Okay, you can use the edge optimize, or if you want to keep it within your VPC, select the private. I'm going to select the regional, where it's this endpoint gonna expose to public, that means internet, anyone can access. Click on create API. Currently, yes, the page is now I am in my API, all the one that I just created. So under resources, currently we don't have any, and we don't have any stages too. So even for the authorizer, right? We'll come to in a bit this point. So let's create resources first. So as we mentioned in the beginning, we're gonna create a resources called users. Create resource. And under resource, what we're going to do, we need to create a method. In this case, we're going to create a get method. You can choose any of the verbs, but in this case we're gonna create get. Right, so once you create a get, so this is where you can select the integration type. So when the user hit the endpoint, API endpoint, you can get the integrate with the Lambda function, where this request goes to Lambda function and it can do some processing and return some data. So either you can do a custom HTTP or you have a mock, and any AWS, for example, you can use. If you go to select the AWS services, you can see many AWS services are supported. Can be integrated with the API gateway. So in this case, what I'm going to do, I'm gonna create a Lambda function, and currently I don't have a Lambda function created. We will create a Lambda function and give it a name here. The Lambda function is very small, very simple. It's just returning the string. That's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna type Lambda and click on in the new tab. Currently I do have a few functions. What I'm going to do, I'm going to create new one from the scratch, or you can use a different option. Let's give it name my API Lambda. Keep the Node.js as a runtime, and let the AWS to create a new role for me. I'm click on the create function. It take a few seconds because it's based on the how busy the AWS and your network connection, because this one need to create a role and need to attach to the function just we created. Seems like it's created. That's good. And if you go down to the code, in the code tab, you has been updated. Well, that's fine. And under the code, you can see it's a very bare minimum code. It's fine because this Lambda is a very simple. We don't need to worry about much. We just need to return some string. That's all we need to do. So other than that, I am going to add console logs. If you are trying with something demo, it's better to add more logs to see what's coming, what's the incoming event and what's going on. So this is really helpful if you're running out with the issue, and this is really helpful to for the troubleshooting. So I'm going to deploy, nothing much. I just add the log, which is event. That's all. Now what we're going to do, I'm copy this name, go back to my API gateway and give it a name. So paste the name and save it. So it's asking to add the permission because this API need to talk to or invoke the Lambda function we just created. So I'm fine with that. Let granted. Right, so our first API endpoint is up and running. So you can do some testing. For example, if you click on the test, and if you click on this test button, as you can see, we get the response from our Lambda. So if I go back and if I change the, let's say, API Lambda, let's say API secure me, API secure me. Let's say I'm deploying my Lambda with a new change, and if I go back to my API gateway, if I do a test again, as you can see, we get a new string, which is the integration work. API gateway can talk to Lambda and it get the response. Right, so now we do created the resources, but I want to expose this API gateway endpoint, the user endpoint, to public or internet. Currently it doesn't allow because we don't have any URL. So what we can do, we can deploy this endpoint to a different environment. For example, in the software development, you could have a dev, test, prod, different environment. So this is something, again, what we're gonna do, we're gonna deploy this API to new endpoint. Currently I don't have any stages. What we're gonna do, we're gonna create stages called dev and deploy our change. Right, so it's now you can see it's moved to second tab, which is stages. Under stages we do have the same endpoint with the invoked URL. So what I'm going to do, if I copy, this is the endpoint which exposed to public, and anyone can hit this endpoint. If I click copy and if I hit, so you can see it's working. We get the response from the Lambda. The problem is, as I mentioned, this endpoint, whoever have this URL can access this endpoint, and they can do anything. So that's the one we need to stop. We need to secure unknown user to access this endpoint. So if I close this again, that's the time what we're gonna do. We added the authorizer to secure our endpoint. Just quickly, I want to show one of the HTTP client tool I'm gonna using in Sonia. This is pretty much same as the Postman. What I did, I create a new request which is the same URL, and if I hit send, you can see we get the response. This is something we're going to use to create a token when we start applying the authorizer. So keep in mind, again, you can use Insomnia, or you can use a Postman, or any alternatives. Right, I'm back in my API endpoint, which is API gateway, which is my API, my dash API. So I'm going to authorize. I'm click on the authorize and click on the new authorize to create a new authorizer. So this is where I'm going to secure our endpoint using the Cognito. As I mentioned, there are two type of authorizer. One is a Lambda, the other one is a Cognito. We're gonna go with the Cognito. If you still after the Lambda authorizer, I do have a separate video in the already done, and please check in the description. You can find the link to the Lambda authorizer. So I give it a name, and so here the next we need to give a user pool, Cognito user pool. So far we haven't created any user pool for this scenario, but we're going to create a soon. This is where we need to put the user pool name, and the token says, okay, let's say this is something like, let's say you can give it any name. Let's say you can auth token. So this auth token is something the user send. Let's say after implementing this Cognito authorizer, the user cannot access without any token, because we are securing. So the end user need to send a token. The token name will be the auth token. This could be anything. So in this case, I put a auth token, but it could be any. Right. Now let's go to create a user pool. We need to create a user pool and paste the name over here. Now let's go to a user pool and create a new one. Right, now let's create a Cognito user pool. I'm typing Cognito, open in a new tab. Currently I do have a one user pool. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna create a new one. So when you create a user pool, there are thousands of options you can pick here and there. So I'm not going through each option or properties. So whenever something is special for this case, I'm going to emphasize. Otherwise, I'm going through the more default option. So in this case, I'm going to select username and allow user to sign with the preferred username. That's fine. And if you have a time, like let's go with all these properties and have a try on your spare time. So in this case, I'm select the username, click on the next, and the password policy, I'm fine with the Cognito default password policy. If you want, you can create a new custom policy, and no MFA, and I'm going with the user account recovery. That's fine. Self registration, that's cool. Everything is pretty standard. What I'm going to do, I'm gonna click on next. This is where you can select the email provider. I'm going with the Cognito one. It's a very simple one, and this is email. Okay, so when the user sign up for a new account, he will get the email from this account. That's the email. I'm gonna click next and give it a name. Okay, this is where I'm gonna name my API pool. Give it a name, I copy the name and go here. Okay, hosted authentication page. This is the actual user login screen the Cognito provide. We will see in this UI in a bit, but you need to click on the. You can use your custom or you can use the Cognito provide. The other one is a domain. I'm going with the Cognito domain. Or if you have your own domain, you can select your custom, use a custom. In this case, I'm gonna use my the Cognito one. Okay, so I put the name. Sometimes name is not available. You can keep changing and get something available for you. Then initial client. So here we are going to create a user pool. When you create a user pool, we need to create an application. So then the application and the user pool get connected, right? So in application in the app client, I'm gonna give a name, my API client, and keep that client secret as it is here. So allow callback URL. So in a practically, what's going to happen? You have an application running on your domain or your in a local host. So what's going to happen when the user sign up? When the user sign in, he put the username and password and click on the login. It's validated by the Cognito, and the response, if the user is successful login, it's redirect to your application. So this is the application. If it is, you can give a specify name. It could goes to your domain, or it could goes to, if you're trying with the local host, you can go to the local host. So I'm gonna give a name. It's not needed. It's not something should be available, because what we after get the token and the some user information. Basically, what's going to happen when the user login, and it's with, as I mentioned, the user is successfully login, it's redirect to this callback URL with some information, authentication information like access token, ID token. That's something I'm interested. I'll show you in a bit, then you can understand why we are putting the any fake URL callback. And so I'm fine with the app setting. So here in the advanced app setting client, so you're fine with this workflow, authentication workflow. Only what you need to change here, identity provider is client useful, this default select in the here. So what you need to do, you need to select rather than code, you need to select implicit grant. So if you select the code, when you log in, you don't get the token, access token and ID token. You get just a code. So if you want to get the token, the access token and ID token, you need to select the implicit grant. I'll show you in a bit. Again, this one, everything get clear after this. So make sure you are selecting implicit grant, not the authentication code grant. And so keep it as everything as a default. Then I'm gonna click next. Pretty much I am in the end of the page. I just need to review is fine. I'm gonna click create a user pool. It should create a user pool. Okay, seems like it got created. This is my new user pool. If I get into there, and currently I don't have any user created, but I do have an app integration and user pool properties. There are some user pool properties. You can use some WAF to minimize some malicious calls. And if I go to app integration, and if I go further down, and this is a hosted UI authorization customization. If you want to change the logo, use some custom CSS, you can use it. And the one that I'm interested in, this app client. So I'm click on the app client and go further down, and here, so this is a hosted UI. This is the login screen, actually login screen, which shows us. If I click on the view hosted UI, so it's open in a new tab. Oh, here we go. We got a login screen free. It's come to username and password, and you can log in. So currently, but by the way, we don't have any user created. So we will create a user and come back to this screen and try to log in. If I go back again and I'm go to my user pool and go to users. I'm creating a new user. Don't send any invitation, that's fine. I'm gonna select test one as a user, no email address, and the password I select I give it a secret password. That's the secret password you show already, right? Okay, that's fine. I'm gonna delete this user. Mark as a email verified, otherwise it shows okay it's pending for email verification. I don't need to do email verification. So then click on user. Right, we got a user got created. If I go back to my login screen and I put a name, and if I put my password and click on sign in, because it's the first time it's asking you to change the password. I change the password, I change one letter in the password, I copy, paste, and give it a name. Any email is fine because you don't get any email to this email address. That's fine. Password not match. Okay, copy. Right, now it's matched. Right, click on next. So what's going to happen, as you can see, this is the URL we gave, and we got something called ID token, and it's give us some more information. What I'm going to do, I'm going to copy this stuff, that's good stuff, and open in VS Code, and I'll show you what's there. Right, so this is the okay, seems like I got only few. What I'm going to do, I'm copy whole bit, copy and paste here. Right, so if I go to if I make it bigger, a bit bigger, so you can see we got a URL, callback URL, and we got a ID, something called ID token, and it's go throughout here, and we should get a access token and many more information. It's get the token, this one token type is bearer token. If I go right, expire token, the token get expire in 360 seconds. What I'm going to do, I'm going to check next one. So it should come with something called access token. If I go slowly, okay, here we go. This is one. So we got a ID token, and we got an ID token, we got an access token. These are the token I'm going to use to access our API gateway. Right, in the real world, what's going to happen, this URL get redirected to your application, and your application extract this access token and ID token. Then it's called the API gateway with this access token. So that's how in the real world it's working. But currently I don't have a separate application. This is demo. That's why I'm gonna use these tricks to something not available. Right. So right, we got the access token and the ID token. Now what we're gonna do, we create a pool. What we're gonna do, I'm gonna copy this API our pool, the one that we created, and go back to the authorizer and paste here. Right, so we need to give a pool name and Cognito, then token source, as I mentioned, it could be any. What we're going to do, we're gonna click on create. Right, our authorizer, the Cognito authorizer, got created. Right, so now we got the authorizer. We can do a testing. So click on the testing, and what I'm going to do, I'm gonna get the ID token. So basically, remember we got the URL, we are come to the ID token and the access token. So what I'm going to do, I'm copy the ID token and paste here and give it a try. So as you can see, we got the success response 200. If I change it to, let's say, if I change something 3, you get unauthorized. Basically, this is where you can check your authorizer is working. So in this case, you need to put the ID token to test. So make sure it's a ID token, because when the user access in the API gateway, you need to use the access token. That's why I emphasize, if you test the authorizer, you need to use the ID token. So authorizer is working. What we're going to do now, we need to hook this authorizer to our API gateway, API endpoint. So click on the resources, go to get our endpoint, and click on the method request. So what we're going to do, we're going to update the authorizer. So if I click on that, and this is our Cognito Authorizer, save the tick. Once it's ticked, you can see it gets some scope. So over here, what you need to do, you need to put an email. This is something we select earlier. Select the email and update. So we hooked our authorizer to our endpoint. Now if someone tried to access our endpoint, it should get a 403 response. Let's give a shot. So before going to that, we did some changes in resources. What we need to do, we need to deploy this change. Click on dev and deploy. So yes, we got the invoke URL. This is the same URL we got. What I'm going to do, I'm open Sonia, and if I go here, let's say I don't have anything. Let's say I'm disable this link. Currently I'm not sending any headers. This is a disable. It's something like deleted. I'm hit this endpoint, so you can see it's a 50 something ending with the 8 VC. Okay, the same URL. If I hit this URL, what we get, it's as a unauthorized, because now you can't access this endpoint, because this is now it's come with some secure endpoint. If I enable this is the auth token, the one that we are mentioning. If I go back to our authorizer, and it says token source is auth token. So what I'm going to do, I'm put the auth token and copy the access token. I'm copy the access token here and paste here. Before pasting, what I'm going to do, I'm put 1 2 3 for example. So this is the currently earlier we got 401. If I send a 1 2 3, what's going to happen? Let's have a look what's going to happen. Still is unauthorized. I'm put here. Now it's there. I'm set the access token. Now let's give cool. We get a hello world from Lambda with the secure. So now it's access successfully access our endpoint. So if I change the auth token to 2, we should get the auth error again, because you need to match the name, the one that you mentioned in our authorizer. So this is how it's working. Seems our endpoint is working. It's secure through the Cognito Authorizer. Cool. So quickly, if I go through rundown what we have done, basically we create the resources and we deploy to staging a dev environment. Then we create the authorizer, which is a Cognito Authorizer. Before creating the authorizer, we need to create a user pool. We create a user pool with some of the default, and we create a user. We create the app client, and then we connect the app client with the user pool. Then we use we got the auth token and the ID token using the one that we created, and then we used to use the ID token to test our authorizer. And then what we did, we hooked the authorizer into our resource over here in the method request and in the authorization property. Then we deploy again, we tested. So that's pretty much the today tutorial. Hopefully you enjoy this video. And again, if you after the Lambda authorizer, I do have a link below, you can follow. That's pretty much for today. Again, if you enjoy this video, please like and subscribe, really appreciate it. Thanks, and see you on next video.